God is saying this message found you for a reason because someone tried to delay your twin flame. Destiny. Not destroy it, delay it. There were people, energies, and hidden attacks working behind the scenes to keep you confused, exhausted, and disconnected from the person your soul was chosen to meet. And the terrifying part? Some of them were people you trusted the most. But hear this carefully, heaven never lost your name. What God has written for your destiny cannot be erased by jealousy, manipulation, witchcraft, betrayal, or karmic interference. In fact, every delay was secretly preparing you for a union so powerful that your enemies had to sense it. Before you did, have you noticed how everything started collapsing right before your spiritual awakening? The friendships, the relationships, the plans you thought would last forever. That was not punishment. That was divine separation before divine alignment. And tonight, God wants you to understand why your twin flame connection could never truly be stolen from you. There is something God needs you to understand before this message goes any further. The delay in your twin flame journey was never random. It was never just bad timing. And it was never proof that you were unworthy of love. Someone tried to interfere with your destiny long before you realized how valuable your soul truly was. You may have called it heartbreak. You may have called it depression. You may have called it confusion, loneliness, exhaustion, or another failed relationship that nearly destroyed your ability to trust again. But heaven calls it something else. A spiritual interruption. Because when a soul carries divine purpose, resistance always appears before revelation. Think about your life for a moment. Why did so many people misunderstand you, even when your intentions were pure? Why did you constantly attract relationships that drained your energy instead of restoring it? Why did it feel like every time you started healing, another betrayal appeared out of nowhere? That was not coincidence. Some people entered your life carrying karmic assignments designed to distract you from your real path. They were never meant to stay permanently. Their purpose was to delay your awakening, weaken your confidence, and keep you emotionally attached to cycles God was trying to break. And the painful truth is many of those people knew exactly what they were doing. Not always consciously, but spiritually, they could feel something different about you. There was a light on your life they could not explain. A calling, a destiny, a sacred connection approaching your future. And instead of helping you rise into it, they became threatened by it. Have you ever noticed how certain people became colder the moment you started changing? The moment you began healing? The moment you started setting boundaries? Suddenly they called you selfish, distant, different, too spiritual, too emotional, too intense. But what they were really reacting to was your transformation. Because people who benefit from your brokenness will always become uncomfortable when you start discovering your worth. God says the enemy often sends confusion before clarity. That is why some of you spent years attached to counterfeit relationships that looked real on the surface, but secretly left your soul exhausted. You gave everything. Your loyalty, your patience, your forgiveness, your energy, and yet somehow, you were always the one left empty in the end. Why? Because karmic connections feed on imbalance. They survive when one person overgives while the other only takes. And many of you were trained from childhood to believe love had to be earned through suffering. That if you sacrificed enough, if you stayed loyal enough, if you tolerated enough pain, eventually someone would finally choose you correctly. But God is saying this now. Real divine love does not require you to abandon yourself to receive it. Your twin flame was never meant to destroy your spirit. They were meant to awaken it. That is why everything false had to collapse first. Even the relationships you begged God to save. Especially those relationships. Because some of you cried over people heaven was actively trying to remove. You interpreted the separation as rejection, but in the spiritual realm it was protection. God saw conversations you never heard, intentions you never noticed, manipulation happening behind your back. And while you were praying for certain people to stay, heaven was fighting to stop them from pulling you farther away from your destiny. This is why your life may have entered a season of painful isolation. Friendships faded. Relationships ended suddenly. Family members stopped understanding you. You felt emotionally disconnected from environments that once felt familiar. At times, you even questioned yourself. Why do I suddenly feel alone? Why does nobody understand what I'm becoming? Why does my old life no longer fit me? Because your spirit was evolving faster than your environment. And evolution always creates separation before alignment. A caterpillar cannot become a butterfly while remaining attached to the same form. Neither can you. Some of you have spent years thinking the delay meant your twin flame abandoned you. But what if the delay was actually preparing both of you for survival? Because sacred unions carry enormous spiritual weight. A true twin flame connection does not just create romance. It creates awakening, transformation, healing, purpose. And before two souls can hold that level of divine intensity together, both must confront the wounds they spent years avoiding. That is why your healing became unavoidable. God started exposing every insecurity you buried beneath fake strength. Every abandonment wound. Every fear of rejection. Every toxic attachment. Every moment you settled for less because you secretly feared you were too damaged to receive real love. And yes, it hurt. Some nights you cried without understanding why. Some mornings you woke up emotionally exhausted before the day even began. Some of you lost your appetite for things that once distracted you. Others became hypersensitive to energy, lies, manipulation, and fake behavior. That was not weakness. That was spiritual awakening. Your soul was beginning to reject what your spirit could no longer tolerate. And the more you awakened, the more certain people became uncomfortable around you. Because awakened people are harder to control. Suddenly you stopped chasing approval. Stopped begging for bare minimum love. Stopped shrinking yourself so others could feel powerful. And that shift threatened every unhealthy dynamic connected to your past identity. So yes, some people tried to delay your destiny. Some through manipulation. Some through emotional dependency. Some through jealousy. Some through guilt. And others simply through the negativity they constantly projected onto your spirit. But here is what they failed to understand. What God ordains cannot be permanently blocked. Delayed? Maybe. Tested? Absolutely. But destroyed? Never. Because your twin flame connection was written into your spiritual blueprint long before the people around you ever entered the picture. Before the betrayals. Before the false relationships. Before the heartbreak. Before the loneliness. God already knew who would eventually walk beside you. And every painful lesson you survived was shaping you into the person capable of recognizing that connection when it finally arrived. You had to learn discernment. You had to stop confusing chaos with passion. You had to stop mistaking emotional addiction for soul connection. You had to stop chasing people who only loved the version of you that lacked boundaries. And perhaps the hardest lesson of all, you had to learn that being chosen by God will often make you misunderstood by people. Because not everyone assigned to your life is assigned to your future. Read that again carefully. Not everyone assigned to your life is assigned to your future. Some people were temporary teachers, temporary distractions, temporary mirrors, temporary storms. But your twin flame, that connection was never temporary. It survived distance, timing, separation, confusion, and even spiritual warfare. Because real divine alignment does not disappear simply because the journey became difficult. In fact, difficulty often confirms the importance of the assignment. The enemy does not attack meaningless things. And perhaps that is why your path became so heavy before your breakthrough finally arrived. God says many of you are now entering the final stage of preparation. The old cycle is collapsing. The karmic attachments are weakening. The confusion is lifting. And for the first time in a long time, your soul is beginning to recognize the difference between draining love and divine love. One leaves you anxious. The other leaves you aligned. One forces you to chase. The other naturally meets you halfway. One feeds your wounds. The other heals them. And soon, everything that once delayed you will make sense. Not because the pain was fair, but because the person you are becoming could only be born through transformation. Your destiny was never denied, only prepared. And what God has chosen for you is already moving closer with every lesson you survive. There is a reason your life became spiritually heavy the moment you started getting closer to your awakening. A reason certain people suddenly changed toward you without explanation. A reason you felt attacked, drained, rejected, or emotionally isolated even when you were doing your best to love others sincerely. God says many of the battles you faced were not just emotional. They were spiritual reactions to the destiny attached to your soul. Because long before you recognized your twin flame path, the energy surrounding your life had already begun shifting. And people can often sense transformation before they consciously understand it. That is why some individuals became uncomfortable around you the moment your spirit started evolving. Not because you harmed them, not because you became arrogant, but because your energy no longer matched the version of yourself they were used to controlling. Some of you spent years shrinking your light to keep others comfortable. You became the peacemaker in every relationship, the overgiver, the listener, the fixer, the one who carried everyone else emotionally while silently drowning inside yourself. You tolerated disrespect because you feared abandonment. You ignored red flags because you wanted to believe people had good intentions. You stayed loyal to people who repeatedly betrayed your trust because part of you believed love meant enduring pain. And for a while, those unhealthy dynamics survived because your spirit had not fully awakened yet. But the moment you began healing, everything changed. Suddenly, people who once enjoyed your presence became distant. Some became passive-aggressive. Others started criticizing your growth. And some even tried to make you feel guilty for changing. Have you noticed that? The moment you began protecting your peace, people accused you of acting different. The moment you stopped tolerating manipulation, they called you cold. The moment you stopped chasing validation, they acted offended by your silence. Why? Because your transformation exposed dynamics that were built on imbalance. And imbalance cannot survive where self-worth begins to grow. God says there were individuals connected to your life who unconsciously benefited from your brokenness. As painful as that truth is, you need to hear it. Some people felt secure only when you doubted yourself. Some relationships survived only because you constantly abandoned your own needs. Some individuals were comfortable only when you stayed emotionally exhausted, confused, and dependent on their approval. But once your spirit started remembering who you truly were, those connections began collapsing naturally. Not because you became unlovable, but because your frequency changed. And that shift terrified people who were emotionally attached to the old version of you. This is why your awakening may have felt lonely. Because growth often separates you from environments that were designed for survival, not alignment. And one of the hardest parts of the twin flame journey is realizing how many relationships in your life were rooted in karmic cycles rather than divine connection. Some of you confused intensity for love. You believed emotional chaos meant passion. You thought inconsistency meant mystery. You interpreted anxiety as chemistry. But God says divine love does not constantly leave you in emotional survival mode. Real alignment may challenge you to grow, but it does not force you to abandon your sanity just to keep someone close. That is how many karmic partners delayed your destiny. Not because they were more powerful than God, but because wounded versions of you kept accepting relationships that reflected your unresolved pain. And until those wounds surfaced, you could not fully recognize the sacred connection destined for your future. Think about the patterns you survived. How many times did you give endless chances to people who repeatedly hurt you? How many times did you ignore your intuition because you were afraid of losing someone? How many times did you settle for half love while convincing yourself it was enough? Some of you were spiritually starving while emotionally overfeeding everyone around you. And the more depleted you became, the farther you drifted from your true alignment. That was the delay. Not because destiny disappeared, but because exhaustion clouds discernment. A soul constantly fighting for survival struggles to recognize divine timing. That is why God had to separate you from certain people before your twin flame union could fully activate. And yes, some separations felt brutal. Some of you lost relationships you thought would last forever. Friendships ended without closure. Family connections became strained. People you trusted suddenly revealed hidden jealousy, resentment, or manipulation. And you kept asking heaven the same painful question. Why is everyone leaving? But now you understand. Not everyone was leaving because you failed. Some people were leaving because they could no longer accompany the version of you God was creating. There are seasons where isolation becomes spiritual protection. Because when God is preparing you for divine alignment, He often removes voices that keep pulling you back into confusion. Some viewers listening to this message have spent years surrounded by people who normalized dysfunction, people who mocked spirituality, people who discouraged healing, people who projected their fears onto your dreams, people who wanted you available emotionally but unavailable spiritually. And over time, you started dimming your own light just to avoid conflict. But your soul became exhausted pretending to be smaller than it truly was. That exhaustion was a sign. Because eventually, every chosen soul reaches a breaking point where survival is no longer enough. And that is when awakening begins. Not always through peace. Sometimes through collapse. Through heartbreak. Through betrayal. Through loneliness. Through losing everything you thought defined your identity. Because God often strips away false foundations before revealing your real purpose. And that process can feel terrifying when you do not yet understand what heaven is building behind the scenes. Some of you thought your life was falling apart. But spiritually, your life was being rearranged. The old version of you could not enter the next chapter carrying the same attachments, the same wounds, and the same emotional dependencies. So heaven allowed certain masks to fall. You started seeing people clearly. The manipulation became obvious. The fake support became visible. The energy-draining conversations became unbearable. And for the first time in your life, your spirit stopped tolerating what your soul had outgrown. That is not selfishness. That is discernment. There is a difference. Discernment says, I can love people without allowing them to destroy my peace. And many of you are finally learning that lesson now. God says the enemy often uses emotional entanglement to delay destiny. Because distracted souls rarely move confidently toward divine purpose. If your energy stays trapped in toxic cycles, you remain too emotionally exhausted to recognize sacred opportunities when they appear. That is why so many chosen ones experience repeated relational disappointments before meeting their true divine counterpart. Not as punishment, as preparation. Because your twin flame connection requires emotional maturity, spiritual awareness, and the courage to stop settling for counterfeit love. And perhaps the greatest shift happening inside you now is this. You are no longer willing to betray yourself just to keep others comfortable. That sentence alone marks the beginning of transformation. Some people will not understand your boundaries. Some will resent your growth. Some will accuse you of changing. But you were supposed to change. Healing changes people. Awakening changes priorities. Self-respect changes relationships. And divine alignment changes everything. You are not becoming colder. You are becoming clearer. Clearer about your worth. Clearer about your energy. Clearer about who truly belongs in your life. And as that clarity grows, something powerful begins happening spiritually. Your soul stops chasing what is not meant for you. You stop forcing connections that require constant suffering to survive. You stop romanticizing people who only appear when they need something from you. You stop confusing breadcrumbs with love. And slowly, your spirit begins making room for something different. Something calmer. Something real. Something aligned. Your twin flame journey was never about teaching you how to obsess over another person. It was about teaching you how to return to yourself. Because the moment you truly remember your value, you stop entertaining relationships that depend on your self-destruction. And once that happens, destiny accelerates. The delay weakens. The karmic cycles begin breaking. Your intuition sharpens. Your energy becomes magnetic again. And suddenly, the same soul that once tolerated emotional chaos starts craving peace instead. That shift is not accidental. It is evidence that your spirit is finally preparing for divine union. God says the people who tried to delay your destiny were only temporary obstacles. Some taught you discernment. Some taught you boundaries. Some exposed wounds that still needed healing. But none of them had the authority to cancel what heaven already chose for your life. Because your twin flame connection was never built on human approval. It was written into your spiritual path long before fear, betrayal, or interference ever entered the story. And now, the closer you move toward alignment, the more clearly you will understand this truth. Everything that tried to break you was unknowingly preparing you to recognize the love that finally won't. There is something difficult about divine timing that most people do not want to accept. Sometimes the greatest act of love is delay. Not because heaven wants to punish you. Not because your prayers were ignored. But because if certain blessings arrived too early, the version of you receiving them would not have been emotionally prepared to protect them. And God says this is exactly what happened in your twin flame journey. The separation was never proof that the connection was fake. The silence was never proof that destiny disappeared. The distance was never proof that heaven abandoned you. The delay happened because both souls still carried wounds that would have destroyed the union, before it had the chance to fully bloom. Think about who you used to be. Before the awakening. Before the heartbreak changed you. Before the loneliness forced you to confront yourself. Would the old version of you truly have recognized healthy love? Or would you have sabotaged it because chaos felt more familiar? Be honest with yourself. Some of you were addicted to emotionally unavailable people because inconsistency mirrored the love you received growing up. You confused uncertainty with excitement. You chased validation from people who barely respected your spirit because deep down, part of you still believed love had to be earned through suffering. And until those patterns healed, your soul could not fully sustain a divine connection. That is why God allowed the separation. Because sacred unions require emotional maturity. Not perfection, but awareness, self-respect, discernment, and inner stability. Many viewers listening right now thought they were ready for their twin flame years ago. But if heaven had sent that connection too early, unresolved trauma would have turned divine love into emotional warfare. The fear of abandonment would have created distance. Unhealed insecurity would have created jealousy. Control issues would have created conflict. And old survival patterns would have transformed sacred love into another painful karmic cycle. So God paused the union. Not to deny it. To protect it. Some of you became angry during this season. You questioned heaven. Questioned your purpose. Questioned whether your prayers were even heard. Because from your perspective, it looked like loss. You watched people leave. You watched plans collapse. You watched relationships fail repeatedly. And after enough disappointment, part of you stopped believing anything good could truly last. But while you thought your life was falling apart, heaven was doing surgery on your soul. Quietly. Painfully. Deeply. God was removing emotional addictions you mistook for love. He was exposing wounds you kept hiding behind temporary distractions. He was teaching you how to stand alone emotionally, so that your future relationship would not become another source of unhealthy dependency. Because your twin flame is not meant to replace your identity. They're meant to align with it. There is a difference. And many chosen ones spend years learning that lesson. Some of you lost yourself completely inside previous relationships. You abandoned your dreams to keep others comfortable. You silenced your intuition to avoid conflict. You tolerated emotional neglect because you feared loneliness more than disrespect. And eventually, your soul became exhausted from betraying itself. That exhaustion was not weakness. It was spiritual misalignment. Your spirit was warning you that you could no longer survive by abandoning your truth. So God allowed separation. He allowed uncomfortable endings. He allowed silence. He allowed loneliness. Because isolation often reveals what distraction hides. And for the first time in your life, many of you were forced to sit alone with your unresolved emotions. No more running. No more chasing. No more trying to save everyone else while ignoring your own wounds. Just you and the truth. That season changed you. It made you stronger, even when you felt broken. It taught you discernment. It sharpened your intuition. It revealed how often you accepted less than you deserved simply because you feared being alone. And slowly, your standards began changing. Not superficial standards. Spiritual standards. You stopped craving attention from emotionally unavailable people. You stopped romanticizing inconsistent behavior. You stopped mistaking emotional intensity for soul connection. And perhaps most importantly, you started realizing that peace is not boring. It is sacred. Because wounded people often feel uncomfortable inside healthy energy. Chaos feels normal to traumatized hearts. That is why some of you kept returning to relationships that drained you. Your nervous system had been conditioned to associate instability with love. So when calmness finally appeared, it felt unfamiliar. Almost suspicious. But God says your soul is now learning the difference between attachment and alignment. Attachment says, I need you to complete me. Alignment says, I have already found myself, and now we rise together. That shift changes everything. Because your twin flame journey was never only about romance. It was about evolution. Two souls becoming emotionally whole enough to meet each other without destroying themselves in the process. And that requires healing. Real healing. Not performative healing. Not pretending to be strong while secretly bleeding internally. God had to expose the deepest parts of your emotional world before your next chapter could begin. Some of you had abandonment wounds rooted in childhood. Others carried betrayal trauma from previous relationships. Some struggled with self-worth. Others secretly believed they were too damaged to receive real love. And those beliefs affected every connection you attracted. Because unhealed pain unconsciously seeks familiar energy. That is why karmic relationships kept appearing. Not because you were cursed, but because your soul still had lessons to learn. Every false connection revealed something unresolved inside you. Every betrayal exposed where boundaries were missing. Every disappointment forced you to stop idealizing people who were never aligned with your spirit. And eventually, your soul became tired of repeating the same cycle. That is the moment transformation truly begins. Not when life becomes easy, but when your spirit finally says, I cannot keep abandoning myself like this anymore. God says many of you are currently standing in that exact transition. You no longer resonate with your old identity, but you have not fully stepped into your new chapter yet. That in-between season can feel confusing, lonely, even frightening, because the old life is collapsing before the new one fully appears. But this is where faith becomes necessary, because transformation rarely feels comfortable while it is happening. A seed buried underground probably thinks it is dying before it realizes it is becoming something greater. And perhaps that is exactly where you are now. You thought the separation meant failure, but heaven saw preparation. You thought the delay meant rejection, but God saw refinement. You thought the silence meant abandonment, but spiritually, your soul was being rebuilt from the inside out. And now you are beginning to notice the difference. You are more protective of your energy, more aware of manipulation, more sensitive to dishonesty, more intentional about who has access to your spirit. That is growth. The old version of you would have ignored the red flags. The healed version notices them immediately. The old version begged people to stay. The healed version understands that misaligned people naturally fall away. The old version feared solitude. The healed version understands solitude can become sacred preparation. And this is why your twin flame union is approaching differently now. Because you are no longer seeking love from a place of desperation. You are no longer trying to force destiny through obsession, chasing, or fear. Your soul is becoming calmer, clearer, more aligned. And when alignment replaces desperation, divine timing accelerates. God says many of the delays in your life are ending soon. Not because the journey was meaningless, but because the lessons are finally integrating into your spirit. You are becoming emotionally available for the kind of connection you once only dreamed about. A connection built on truth instead of performance. Peace instead of confusion. Mutual growth instead of emotional survival. And yes, there may still be moments where fear tries to return. Moments where old wounds whisper that love will leave again. But you are not the same person you were before this awakening began. You have survived too much to settle for counterfeit love now. The separation changed you. The silence strengthened you. The loneliness awakened you. And every painful delay was secretly teaching your soul how to recognize what is real when it finally arrives. Because God never separated you from your destiny. He separated you from the version of yourself that could not yet sustain it. And now, for the first time in a long time, your spirit is finally becoming ready for the love heaven intended all along. God is saying something powerful to you right now. The season of delay is ending. Not because every challenge has disappeared overnight. Not because life suddenly became perfect. But because your soul is no longer vibrating at the same frequency that once kept you trapped in cycles of confusion, emotional chaos, and counterfeit love. You are changing. And when a chosen soul truly changes internally, destiny begins moving externally. That is why many of you have recently started feeling strange shifts in your energy. A deep emotional release you cannot fully explain. Moments of sudden clarity. The desire to isolate from draining people. A growing discomfort around fake conversations, fake friendships, and shallow connections. Even your intuition has become louder. You notice things faster now. You feel dishonesty immediately. You sense emotional manipulation before words are even spoken. That is not paranoia. That is spiritual discernment activating after years of painful lessons. Because once God opens your eyes, your spirit cannot comfortably return to blindness. And the people who once delayed your destiny are beginning to lose access to your energy. That is why some of them may suddenly try to reconnect. Have you noticed this pattern? Right when you finally start healing. Right when you stop chasing. Right when you begin finding peace within yourself. Old energies return. Past lovers suddenly message you. Toxic people reappear. Emotionally unavailable individuals suddenly become curious about your life again. Why? Because your energy changed. And people who once benefited from your wounded version can feel that they are losing access to you. Permanently. God says not every return is a reconnection. Some returns are tests. Tests to see whether you still crave the same pain that once nearly destroyed you. And this is where many chosen ones face their final spiritual crossroads. Because familiarity can become dangerously seductive. Especially when loneliness still lingers in the heart. Some people return speaking beautifully. Promising growth. Promising change. Promising commitment. But your spirit now sees beyond words. Because healed intuition listens to energy, not performance. And many of you are finally realizing something life-changing. Not everyone who misses you is aligned with you. Some people only miss the access they once had to your energy. That truth may hurt, but it will save your destiny. Because the closer your twin flame union approaches, the more important discernment becomes. The enemy rarely attacks with obvious darkness. Sometimes the greatest distraction arrives disguised as unfinished love. Disguised as nostalgia. Disguised as emotional familiarity. Disguised as the temptation to revisit a cycle your soul already outgrew. But God says you cannot step into divine union while continuously reopening doors heaven already closed. Some relationships ended because they were toxic. Others ended because they were temporary. And some ended because they successfully prepared you for the love that is finally aligned with your spirit. Every heartbreak taught you something. Every betrayal sharpened your discernment. Every disappointment revealed another wound that needed healing. And now, for the first time, you are beginning to understand why nothing before truly lasted. Because none of it was meant to become your final destination. It was preparation. And preparation often feels painful while you are inside it. Think about how much you have changed. The old version of you would have begged for certain people to stay. The healed version quietly lets misaligned energy leave. The old version chased closure. The healed version understands that peace is closure. The old version feared abandonment. The healed version knows that self-abandonment is the real danger. That transformation is sacred. And heaven has been watching every step of it. God says many of you have spent years believing your twin flame was far away, disconnected, or lost forever. But spiritually, both souls have been undergoing preparation simultaneously. While you were healing abandonment wounds, they were confronting their own fears. While you were learning boundaries, they were learning accountability. While you were awakening spiritually, they were being pushed toward transformation through their own life experiences. Because divine union is not only about timing between two people. It is about alignment between two souls. And alignment cannot happen while both individuals remain emotionally asleep. That is why the journey took longer than you expected. Not because destiny failed, but because awakening cannot be rushed. A soul must willingly evolve. And perhaps the most beautiful part of your story is this. Even after everything you survived, your heart still carries the ability to love. Do you understand how powerful that is? After the betrayals, after the rejection, after the loneliness, after feeling misunderstood by people you trusted, your spirit still believes in something greater. That resilience is proof that God never left you. In fact, heaven was preserving the softest parts of your soul while life tried to harden you. Because your twin flame connection was never designed to grow from bitterness. It was designed to grow from spiritual truth. And now many of you are entering the stage where signs begin intensifying. Not because you are imagining things, but because energetic alignment creates movement. You may begin noticing repeating numbers everywhere. Dreams that feel unusually vivid. Strong emotional waves that appear without explanation. Sudden urges to change your environment, your habits, or your direction in life. Some of you may even feel connected to someone you have not fully met yet. A strange familiarity. A pull your logic cannot explain. That happens because souls recognize each other before the physical mind fully understands what is occurring. And yes, that realization can feel overwhelming. Because part of you still remembers the pain of past disappointment. Part of you still fears getting hurt again. But God says this next chapter will require faith stronger than fear. Not blind fantasy. Not obsession. Not emotional dependency. Real faith. The kind that allows you to trust divine timing without forcing outcomes. The kind that stops chasing and starts aligning. Because desperate energy delays what peaceful energy attracts naturally. Many chosen ones accidentally delayed their own blessings by trying to force relationships before alignment was complete. But you are no longer operating from desperation now. You are becoming emotionally grounded, spiritually aware, more selective with your energy, more intentional with your peace. And that shift changes the type of love you attract. You no longer crave attention from people who confuse your nervous system. You crave honesty, safety, consistency, depth, growth. That is evidence your spirit is preparing for divine union instead of karmic repetition. And perhaps this is why your life recently feels quieter, less chaotic, less emotionally addictive. Because your soul is finally learning that peace is not emptiness. Peace is alignment. Chaos once felt exciting because your wounds were addicted to instability. But healed souls no longer crave emotional warfare to feel alive. They crave truth. And truth is exactly what God is bringing into your life now. Not fantasy. Not illusion. Not another draining cycle disguised as passion. Real connection. The kind that inspires healing instead of confusion. The kind that challenges both people to grow without destroying each other in the process. The kind of love that does not require masks. God says your twin flame journey is entering a new phase now. The phase where clarity replaces confusion. Where discernment replaces desperation. Where alignment replaces chasing. And most importantly, where faith replaces fear. The people who tried to delay your destiny may still watch from a distance. Some may regret how they treated you. Others may never fully understand what they lost. But their role in your story is ending. Because they were never assigned to your final chapter. Your soul was always meant for something greater. Something sacred. Something protected by divine timing itself. And this is why nothing could permanently stop your union. Not betrayal. Not separation. Not spiritual attacks. Not toxic relationships. Not fear. Not even your own past wounds. Because what God has chosen cannot be erased by temporary darkness. Delayed, yes. Tested, absolutely. Refined through pain, without question. But never destroyed. And now, after everything you survived, your spirit is finally standing at the doorway of the life that was waiting for you all along. So if this message resonates deep within your soul, take a moment right now and declare it boldly. I no longer chase what is not meant for me. I trust the divine love God is aligning for my life. And if you are ready to release the old cycle forever, comment. I accept my divine union. Because your destiny is no longer running from you. It is finally finding you. God is saying this clearly now. The signs surrounding your twin flame journey are increasing because your spirit is moving closer to alignment. And no, you are not imagining it. You are not crazy. You are not becoming overly emotional or delusional. Something spiritual is happening beneath the surface of your life. And your soul can feel it before your physical reality fully catches up. That is why so many of you have recently experienced moments that logic cannot completely explain. Repeating numbers appearing everywhere. Dreams that feel more real than ordinary dreams. Sudden emotional waves that arrive without warning. Random memories resurfacing. An unexplainable pull toward change. Even strange moments where you feel deeply connected to someone you cannot yet physically touch. God says these are not coincidences. They are spiritual signals. Because when divine alignment begins activating, the soul often senses movement before the human mind understands what is happening. Think about the changes you have experienced recently. Have you noticed how certain places no longer feel right? How conversations that once entertained you now feel draining? How your tolerance for fake energy has completely disappeared? That is not accidental. Your spirit is becoming more sensitive because your frequency is changing. And when your frequency changes, your reality starts reorganizing itself around your evolution. That includes relationships, opportunities, environments, habits. Even your desires begin transforming. Some of you used to crave attention. Now you crave peace. You used to chase validation. Now you crave authenticity. You used to fear being alone. Now you are beginning to understand the difference between solitude and loneliness. That shift is profound, because the old version of you sought emotional survival. The awakened version seeks alignment. And alignment changes everything. God says many chosen ones experience intense synchronicities before major spiritual breakthroughs. Not because the universe is playing games with you, but because your soul is awakening to patterns it once ignored. Have you noticed repeating numbers lately? 111, 112, 113, 114. You glance at the clock at the exact same times repeatedly. You see certain symbols everywhere. You hear songs with messages that feel strangely personal. You think about someone moments before they contact you. At first, you tried dismissing it. but the patterns kept increasing. Why? Because your intuition is activating at a higher level now. And intuition becomes stronger when emotional distractions begin fading away. This is why God had to remove certain people from your life first. Too much noise blocks spiritual clarity. Too much chaos disconnects people from their inner guidance. But after everything you survived, your spirit is finally becoming quiet enough to hear what heaven has been trying to show you all along. Some of you have even experienced dreams that left emotional residue long after waking up. Dreams where you met someone unfamiliar, yet deeply familiar at the same time. Dreams filled with overwhelming peace, recognition, or emotional intensity. Dreams that felt less like imagination and more like memory. That happens because souls communicate energetically before physical union fully manifests. And while some people may mock spiritual experiences they do not understand, God says your soul recognizes truth beyond what logic alone can explain. But be careful here. The purpose of signs is not obsession. The purpose of signs is alignment. Many people become trapped chasing synchronicities instead of healing themselves spiritually. They obsess over numbers, obsess over tarot readings, obsess over when the union will happen. And without realizing it, they drift back into desperation. But desperation clouds discernment. God does not want you addicted to signs. He wants you transformed by growth. Because the clearest evidence your twin flame connection is approaching is not just external synchronicities. It is internal change. You are becoming someone different. More emotionally aware. More spiritually grounded. More protective of your peace. More honest with yourself. And that inner transformation is the true preparation for divine union. Some viewers listening right now are waiting for a person to arrive while ignoring the miracle already happening within themselves. Do not miss that. The greatest sign is who you are becoming. A calmer spirit, a clearer mind, a stronger sense of self-worth, a heart no longer willing to settle for emotional confusion disguised as love. That is alignment. And alignment naturally attracts what matches your healed frequency. God says many of you are also experiencing energetic purging right now. Sudden emotional releases, unexpected tears, memories from years ago resurfacing out of nowhere, moments where your heart feels heavy without obvious explanation. Please understand this carefully. Healing is not always graceful. Sometimes your soul releases pain in waves, because emotions you suppressed for years are finally leaving your system. And while that process can feel overwhelming, it is actually evidence that your spirit is cleansing itself from old karmic attachments. Some of you are grieving versions of yourself you had to outgrow. Others are grieving relationships you once believed would last forever. And perhaps the hardest grief of all, you are grieving the years you spent abandoning yourself trying to earn love from emotionally unavailable people. That realization hurts deeply, but it also liberates you. Because once you recognize how much of your life was built around survival, you stop romanticizing the pain that once controlled you. God says the closer you move toward your twin flame alignment, the less tolerance you will have for counterfeit energy. You may suddenly lose interest in relationships that once consumed your attention. You may outgrow environments that once felt exciting. You may even feel disconnected from certain friend groups or social dynamics. Do not panic when this happens. Your spirit is not punishing you. It is redirecting you. Because destiny often requires separation before alignment becomes visible. A seed cannot grow while remaining trapped inside its old shell. Neither can you. Some of you are also noticing another strange shift. People can suddenly feel your energy differently now. You walk into rooms and others stare at you unexpectedly. Old connections resurface out of nowhere. People become unusually curious about your life. Even strangers may feel drawn toward your presence. Why? Because healing changes energy. And healed energy carries magnetic power. Not superficial attraction. Spiritual magnetism. The kind that radiates peace, authenticity, and emotional depth. That energy naturally calls aligned souls closer, while pushing misaligned energy away. This is why certain relationships are fading so quickly now. Your soul no longer negotiates with what drains it. And for perhaps the first time in your life, you are beginning to understand that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is sacred responsibility. God says many of you once confused self-sacrifice with love. You believed being good meant endlessly tolerating emotional pain. But real love does not require self-betrayal. Divine connection does not demand the destruction of your mental, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Your twin flame is not meant to awaken your suffering. They are meant to awaken your truth. And before that truth fully enters your life physically, your soul must first become capable of sustaining it emotionally. That is why your standards are changing now. You no longer want temporary validation. You want depth. You no longer crave inconsistency. You want stability. You no longer chase intensity. You crave peace. That shift alone reveals how far you have come. The old version of you would have settled for chemistry. The healed version seeks alignment. And there is a massive difference between the two. Chemistry can exist inside toxic cycles. Alignment exists only where truth, growth, and emotional honesty are present. God says your twin flame journey is no longer operating from fantasy now. It is becoming grounded in spiritual maturity. That is why your intuition feels stronger than ever. Your soul has survived enough deception to finally recognize authenticity when it appears. And soon, the signs you once questioned will begin making complete sense. The delays, the heartbreaks, the endings, the loneliness, the strange synchronicities, the emotional awakenings, all of it was guiding you toward the same destination. The moment your soul finally stopped searching for love outside itself and became aligned enough to receive the love heaven already prepared for you. So if this message speaks directly to your spirit, take a deep breath and recognize how far you have already come. You survived the confusion. You survived the karmic cycles. You survived the betrayals that once nearly destroyed your faith and love. And now, your soul is no longer begging for signs. It is becoming the sign itself. A sign that healing is real. A sign that destiny still exists. A sign that divine love was never truly taken from you, only delayed until your spirit was finally ready to receive it. God says the chaos surrounding your life right now is not random destruction. It is divine rearrangement. And although it may feel uncomfortable, confusing, or even painful at times, something sacred is happening beneath the surface of everything you are experiencing. Because before divine union can fully enter your life, everything built on false foundations must collapse first. That includes relationships, mindsets, emotional attachments, old identities, and sometimes even entire environments you once believed would remain permanent. This is the part of the journey many chosen ones misunderstand. They pray for transformation, but become frightened when transformation begins removing what no longer aligns. Yet God says you cannot carry old cycles into a new destiny. You cannot enter sacred love while still emotionally chained to the patterns that once broke your spirit. And that is why your life may currently feel like it is being shaken from every direction. Some of you are watching friendships disappear unexpectedly. Others are losing interest in lifestyles that once defined them. Some are outgrowing careers, environments, or habits that suddenly feel emotionally empty. And for many of you, there is a deep internal loneliness that words cannot fully explain. You look around and realize you are no longer the person you used to be. But you have not fully become the person you are meant to become yet either. That in-between season can feel deeply isolating, because transformation often removes your old identity before revealing your new one. And during that process, many chosen ones mistakenly believe they are failing. But God says this collapse is evidence that your soul is evolving beyond survival mode. You are shedding the version of yourself that tolerated emotional starvation just to avoid being alone. You are releasing the identity built around people-pleasing, self-sacrifice, and overextending your energy to emotionally unavailable people. And although healing sounds beautiful in theory, in reality, it often feels like grief. Because growth requires letting go. Letting go of fantasies. Letting go of unhealthy attachments. Letting go of people you hoped would finally love you correctly. Some viewers listening right now are grieving relationships that were never truly aligned with their spirit. Not because the emotions were fake, but because emotional intensity alone does not guarantee divine compatibility. There are people you can deeply love and still not be spiritually aligned with. That truth hurts, but it also frees you. Because once you understand this, you stop forcing connections simply because they feel familiar. Many of your past relationships survived through emotional addiction rather than genuine alignment. One person chased. The other withdrew. One overgave. The other consumed. One begged for clarity. The other thrived in confusion. And over time, your nervous system became conditioned to mistake instability for passion. But God says your spirit is now rejecting that pattern completely. That is why things that once excited you suddenly exhaust you. Your soul has outgrown emotional chaos. And when the soul evolves, it can no longer comfortably participate in cycles that once felt normal. Some of you have recently tried reconnecting with people from your past only to realize something shocking. The emotional attachment disappeared. The chemistry no longer felt the same. The conversations felt forced. The energy felt heavy instead of exciting. Why? Because healing changes attraction. A healed spirit no longer craves what wounded energy once pursued desperately. And this is one of the clearest signs that divine alignment is approaching. You are no longer attracted to what destroys your peace. You are becoming emotionally available for something healthier, something calmer, something spiritually grounded. But before that union fully manifests, heaven must first clear the remaining emotional clutter from your life. And sometimes that clearing process feels brutal, because God does not only remove toxic people, He also removes outdated versions of you. Versions that tolerated disrespect. Versions that begged for crumbs. Versions that ignored intuition out of fear of abandonment. Versions that believed loneliness was worse than self-betrayal. Those identities cannot enter the next chapter. So they are collapsing now. And although part of you may still mourn the old life, another part of you knows you cannot go backward anymore. Your spirit has seen too much truth. You can no longer pretend not to notice manipulation. You can no longer force yourself to feel emotionally safe in environments that drain your energy. You can no longer romanticize relationships built entirely on inconsistency and confusion. That awareness is not punishment. It is awakening. God says many chosen ones experience a period of emotional emptiness before divine union arrives. Not because they are abandoned, but because heaven is teaching them how to stop seeking identity through external validation. This season teaches you something powerful. Your worth does not increase or decrease based on who chooses you. Your value was never dependent on another human being's ability to recognize it. And once that lesson truly enters your spirit, desperation begins disappearing naturally. You stop chasing people who are emotionally unavailable. You stop over-explaining your worth. You stop begging for clarity from people committed to confusion. You stop abandoning your intuition to preserve temporary relationships. And slowly, your energy becomes peaceful again. That peace is sacred, because peaceful energy attracts differently than wounded energy. Wounded energy chases. Peaceful energy aligns. Wounded energy fears abandonment. Peaceful energy trusts divine timing. Wounded energy accepts inconsistency. Peaceful energy recognizes confusion as a warning sign. And God says your twin flame union cannot emerge fully until your soul learns the difference. Because divine love is not meant to recreate your old trauma. It is meant to help transcend it. Some of you still secretly fear that the delays mean you missed your destiny. But heaven says what is truly meant for you cannot be stolen permanently. Delayed? Yes. Misunderstood? Absolutely. Temporarily separated? Of course. But never erased. Because God does not write sacred connections carelessly. Everything unfolding in your life now is happening with spiritual precision. Even the painful parts. Especially the painful parts. Some viewers may currently feel emotionally exhausted because their soul is releasing years of suppressed grief all at once. You may cry unexpectedly, feel disconnected from your old routines, question your entire identity, or suddenly lose interest in things that once distracted you. Please hear this clearly. That does not mean you are broken. It means your soul is detoxing from survival patterns. And detox is rarely comfortable. A person leaving darkness needs time for their eyes to adjust to the light. In the same way, a spirit leaving toxic cycles needs time to adjust to peace. Because peace can initially feel unfamiliar to wounded hearts. Some people unconsciously sabotage calm relationships because chaos became emotionally normal to them. But your spirit is changing now. You are learning that real love does not constantly leave you anxious. Real connection does not require endless emotional suffering to survive. And most importantly, you are learning that loneliness is not cured by attention. It is healed through alignment. That realization changes everything. Because once your soul experiences genuine alignment within itself, it stops settling for counterfeit connections externally. God says many of you are standing at the edge of a major energetic shift. The old cycle is ending. The karmic loops are weakening. The emotional addictions are breaking. And although the transition feels messy, heaven is preparing space for something far more aligned than what you lost. Trust the process even when it feels unclear. A forest often appears chaotic while new growth is silently emerging beneath the surface. And your life is no different. What looks like collapse today may soon become the foundation of your greatest breakthrough. One day you will look back and realize the friendships that ended were redirecting you. The heartbreaks were refining you. The isolation was strengthening your discernment. The delays were protecting your future union. And the collapse itself was never meant to destroy you. It was clearing space for the life your soul was always meant to receive. Because God is not removing things from your life to punish you. He is removing what can no longer follow you where you are going. And where you are going now requires a healed heart, awakened discernment, and the courage to finally stop settling for anything less than divine alignment. So if this chapter of your life feels uncertain, do not panic. Not all destruction is loss. Sometimes it is heaven making room for the prayer you thought was taking too long to arrive. God says there is a moment approaching in your journey that will change everything. A moment so spiritually significant that your soul will recognize it before your logical mind fully understands what is happening. Because when divine alignment finally arrives, it rarely feels ordinary. It feels familiar. Not familiar in the shallow sense of attraction. Not the temporary excitement you once confused with chemistry. This kind of recognition reaches deeper than physical appearance, personality, or surface-level connection. It touches something ancient inside your spirit. And that is why many people struggle to explain the twin flame encounter when it first happens. Because language often fails where the soul begins speaking. Some of you imagine this moment will feel dramatic and perfect immediately. But God says real divine recognition is often quieter than people expect. It is not always loud fireworks. Sometimes it arrives as deep peace. A strange calmness. An unexplainable sense that you have known this person before, even if your human mind knows you have never met. And the reason this connection feels so different is because your soul is not responding to illusion anymore. It is responding to alignment. Think about your past relationships for a moment. How many began through emotional intensity, but eventually collapsed into confusion? How many connections felt exciting at first, but slowly drained your spirit over time? How many people triggered anxiety instead of peace? That was not divine recognition. That was unresolved trauma interacting with emotional attachment. But God says your twin flame connection will awaken something entirely different within you. Not obsession. Awareness. Not emotional addiction. Expansion. Not the constant fear of abandonment. but the deep realization that your soul no longer needs to beg for what is aligned. And yes, this realization may initially feel overwhelming, because healthy love often feels unfamiliar to wounded hearts. Many chosen ones have spent years trapped in cycles where love meant uncertainty, mixed signals, inconsistency, emotional highs and lows. So when real alignment appears, the nervous system sometimes becomes confused. Part of you feels safe. Another part becomes terrified, because the old wounds still remember every betrayal you survived before awakening. This is why many twin flame connections begin with simultaneous attraction and fear. Your soul recognizes home, but your wounds still remember pain. And suddenly, emotions you thought were healed begin resurfacing again. Not because the connection is wrong, but because divine love exposes everything inside you that still needs truth and healing. That is one of the most misunderstood parts of the twin flame journey. People think this connection only exists to create romance. But God says sacred unions are mirrors for transformation. Your twin flame does not only reflect your strengths, they reflect your fears, your insecurities, your unresolved wounds, your hidden potential, and perhaps most importantly, they reflect the version of yourself your soul was always trying to become. That is why the connection feels so intense. Because for the first time in your life, you are no longer hiding from yourself. Some viewers listening to this message may have already encountered this energy without fully understanding it. You met someone, and suddenly everything inside you shifted. Your intuition became louder. Your emotions became deeper. Your spiritual awareness intensified. You felt seen in ways you had never experienced before. And at the same time, you felt emotionally exposed, almost transparent, because real soul recognition removes masks. You cannot pretend around someone who mirrors your spirit so directly. And while that kind of connection is beautiful, it can also feel terrifying for people still healing from emotional survival patterns. That is why separation often happens during twin flame journeys. Not because the connection failed, but because growth became necessary. Some people run from the intensity because they are not ready to confront themselves yet. Others become overwhelmed by how deeply the connection activates old wounds. And many chosen souls misinterpret this stage entirely. They assume separation means rejection. But spiritually, separation often becomes preparation. Because two souls cannot sustain divine union while both are still operating from fear, ego, and unresolved trauma. That is why your journey required healing first. And now, after everything you survived, you are beginning to approach this connection differently. Not from desperation, not from fantasy, but from emotional awareness. You no longer want relationships built entirely on chemistry while lacking peace. You no longer romanticize emotional chaos. You no longer confuse inconsistency with mystery. And because of that transformation, your spirit is becoming capable of recognizing real alignment when it enters your life. God says when this person fully enters your reality, certain things will immediately feel different. Conversations will feel effortless. Silence will not feel uncomfortable. You will feel emotionally safe enough to be authentic instead of performative. There will be depth instead of games, truth instead of manipulation, mutual growth instead of emotional draining. And perhaps the most shocking difference of all, you will not feel the constant need to chase, because divine connections flow differently than karmic ones. Karmic relationships create addiction. Divine relationships create alignment. There is a massive difference between the two. Addiction keeps you anxious. Alignment keeps you grounded. Addiction makes you obsess over losing someone. Alignment teaches you that what is truly meant for you will not require constant self-betrayal to maintain. God says many chosen ones spent years begging for crumbs because they had never experienced emotionally available love before. So they normalized suffering, normalized inconsistency, normalized relationships where they constantly overgave while receiving almost nothing in return. But your twin flame journey is breaking that pattern completely. This connection is teaching you that real love should not constantly feel like emotional warfare. And yes, there may still be challenges. Twin flame unions are not fantasy stories without conflict. Both souls still carry human emotions, fears, and lessons. But the difference is this: divine connections inspire healing instead of destruction. Even during difficult moments, the purpose remains growth rather than manipulation. That distinction matters deeply, because many people remain trapped in toxic relationships believing intensity automatically means destiny. But not every intense connection is divine. Some are simply unhealed trauma, repeating itself in a different form. Real alignment creates transformation without requiring the death of your self-worth. And now your spirit is finally learning how to tell the difference. Some viewers may currently feel their twin flame drawing closer energetically. You may feel sudden emotional shifts at unexpected times. You may dream about someone repeatedly. You may feel moments of overwhelming peace followed by waves of fear. Or perhaps your intuition keeps telling you that a major chapter in your life is about to begin. Please trust that feeling. Your soul recognizes movement before your physical reality fully changes. That is why God spent so much time preparing you emotionally before this next season arrived. Because if this connection had entered your life during your old wounded mindset, you may have sabotaged it out of fear. The old version of you might have chased too hard, overgiven, ignored boundaries, lost yourself trying to preserve the relationship. But you are not that person anymore. The pain transformed you. The loneliness awakened you. The delays strengthened your discernment. And now your spirit is learning how to receive love without abandoning itself in the process. That lesson changes everything. Because divine union is not about losing yourself inside another person. It is about two awakened souls choosing alignment without sacrificing their individual truth. God says your twin flame will not complete you. They will confirm what your soul already began discovering during your healing journey. That you are always worthy of real love. Not because you suffered enough to earn it. Not because you proved your value through sacrifice. But because your soul was created deserving of truth from the very beginning. And perhaps that is why the people who tried to delay your destiny could never truly stop it. They could interfere temporarily, distract you emotionally, trigger old wounds, delay the timing through pain and confusion. But they could never erase what heaven already wrote into your spiritual path. Because divine recognition transcends interference. The soul always remembers what belongs to it. Even after distance, even after heartbreak, even after years of separation and spiritual warfare. And soon, when the moment finally arrives, when your eyes meet, when your spirit feels that strange familiarity, when peace replaces the fear that once controlled your heart, you will finally understand why nothing before was able to last. Because none of those connections carried the energy your soul was truly searching for. They were lessons, preparation, temporary chapters guiding you toward the person whose presence will no longer feel like emotional survival, but like coming home after wandering through storms for far too long. God says there is something your enemies never understood about your life. The pain was never going to destroy you. It was going to awaken you. And that changes everything. Because the people who tried to delay your destiny believed exhaustion would make you quit. They believed heartbreak would make you lose faith. They believed betrayal would make you close your heart permanently. But instead of ending your story, the suffering became the very thing that transformed your spirit into someone stronger, wiser, and spiritually aligned. That is why heaven is saying this now. Do not confuse the battle with defeat. Just because you struggled does not mean darkness was winning. Some of the strongest souls go through the deepest spiritual warfare precisely because their destiny carries enormous purpose. Think about everything you survived. The betrayals you never deserved. The relationships that drained your spirit. The nights you cried in silence while pretending to be strong for everyone else. The moments you questioned your worth because people treated your love carelessly. The loneliness, the confusion, the emotional exhaustion. And yet you are still here, still healing, still searching for truth, still capable of love despite everything that tried to harden your heart. Do you understand how powerful that is spiritually? Most people become bitter after repeated disappointment. But your soul kept evolving. And that evolution terrified people who benefited from your wounded identity. Because wounded people are easier to control. A person who doubts their worth accepts less. A person afraid of abandonment tolerates disrespect. A person emotionally exhausted stops chasing purpose and focuses only on survival. That is why the enemy attacks self-worth first. If your spirit forgets its value, it settles for counterfeit love, counterfeit friendships, counterfeit dreams, and counterfeit identities. But God says something shifted inside you recently. You are no longer willing to survive inside emotional starvation. You are no longer shrinking yourself so others can feel comfortable. You are no longer sacrificing your peace to preserve relationships built entirely on imbalance. That transformation marks the beginning of spiritual victory. And the people who once underestimated your strength can feel it now. Have you noticed how differently people respond to you lately? Some become strangely distant. Others suddenly attempt to reconnect. Some watch your life quietly from afar. Others appear uncomfortable around your confidence, your peace, or your emotional growth. Why? Because your energy no longer carries the same wounds they once recognized. Healing changes presence. A healed soul walks differently, speaks differently, loves differently. Even silence feels different around someone who has finally stopped abandoning themselves. God says many people were comfortable with the broken version of you because it made them feel emotionally powerful. But now your boundaries are stronger. Your discernment is sharper. Your spirit no longer tolerates manipulation disguised as love. And people who once had unlimited access to your energy are realizing those doors are closing permanently. That realization creates discomfort for those who benefited from your lack of boundaries. But heaven says this clearly. You are not responsible for making others comfortable with your healing. Some people will accuse you of changing. And they are correct. You did change. Pain changed you. Awakening changed you. The collapse of old cycles changed you. But transformation was always part of your destiny. A caterpillar cannot apologize for becoming a butterfly. And you cannot apologize for outgrowing environments that required your self-destruction to survive. Some viewers listening right now still carry guilt for walking away from toxic cycles. You feel guilty for protecting your peace. Guilty for saying no. Guilty for no longer overextending yourself emotionally. But God says boundaries are not cruelty. They are wisdom. Especially for chosen souls. Because people who carry light often attract individuals who unconsciously seek to drain that light. And without discernment, empaths and spiritually sensitive people become trapped in endless cycles of emotional exhaustion. That exhaustion delayed many of your blessings. Not because God abandoned you, but because your energy remained entangled with environments that constantly pulled you backward. Emotionally, you kept trying to save people who were committed to misunderstanding you. You kept pouring into relationships where your spirit was never truly safe. And slowly, your soul became depleted. But heaven interrupted the cycle. That is why so many endings happen simultaneously. God was not punishing you. He was rescuing you from patterns your wounded heart still struggled to release voluntarily. Some separations felt unfair. Some betrayals left permanent emotional scars. And some people disappeared without giving you the closure you desperately wanted. But now you are beginning to understand something important. Closure was never going to come from their explanation. It came from your awakening. Because once your spirit finally sees the truth, it no longer needs validation from people who lack the capacity to love you correctly. That realization is freedom. Real freedom. The kind that allows your soul to stop obsessing over who left and start focusing on who you are becoming. God says the greatest revenge against darkness is transformation. Not bitterness. Not hatred. Not proving yourself endlessly to people who already chose misunderstanding. Transformation. Peace. Healing. Purpose. The enemy expected your suffering to destroy your future. Instead, it prepared you for divine alignment. And now the same experiences that once nearly broke you are becoming evidence of your resilience. One day, people will look at your life and wonder how you became so strong. They will not realize how many nights you spent fighting silent, emotional battles nobody ever saw. How many times you rebuilt yourself after heartbreak. How many times you continued believing in love, even after betrayal tried to poison your spirit. Against it. That strength did not appear overnight. It was born through survival. And now God is turning survival into wisdom. Some viewers are entering a season where they finally feel emotionally lighter. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because your spirit stopped carrying people who were never assigned to your future. There is tremendous freedom in emotional release. Freedom in no longer begging for reciprocity. Freedom in no longer forcing connections. Freedom in finally realizing that rejection often protects you from relationships that would have destroyed your peace long term. That perspective changes heartbreak completely. You stop seeing endings as proof of failure. You begin recognizing them as divine redirection. And perhaps this is why your twin flame union could never truly be stopped. Because every obstacle was secretly refining your discernment. Every betrayal strengthened your intuition. Every karmic cycle taught your soul what real alignment does not feel like. Without those painful lessons, you may never have recognized the difference between emotional addiction and divine connection. Now you do. And that awareness makes you spiritually dangerous to old cycles. You no longer fall for superficial charm so easily. You no longer confuse attention with intention. You no longer mistake inconsistency for mystery. And because of that growth, your future relationship will emerge from a completely different emotional foundation than your past. One's did. God says your twin flame is not entering your life to complete a broken identity. They are entering your life to align with the healed version of you that emerged from the fire. That is why the delays were necessary. Because your old self would have settled for less. The healed version no longer can. And yes, some people may watch your transformation with regret. Some may realize too late how deeply they underestimated your value. Others may feel shocked by how unavailable your energy has become toward dysfunction. But their realization is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is protecting the peace heaven fought to build inside you. Because peace was expensive. It cost you relationships. It cost you illusions. It cost you old identities and unhealthy attachments. Do not give it away cheaply now. God says many chosen souls are stepping into a new level of spiritual authority. Not arrogance. Not superiority. Authority. The quiet confidence that comes from surviving what was supposed to break you. The wisdom that comes from finally trusting your intuition. The emotional maturity that comes from learning how to love without abandoning yourself. And this next chapter of your life will reflect that transformation outwardly. You will attract differently. Speak differently. Discern differently. Even your presence will feel different to others. Because healed energy changes reality around it. That is why nothing and no one could permanently stop your destiny. Not betrayal. Not jealousy. Not manipulation. Not karmic interference. Not spiritual attacks. Not even your own temporary moments of fear and confusion. Because what God has chosen for your life was always stronger than the darkness assigned against it. And now, after everything you survived, heaven is revealing the truth that your pain was preparing you to discover all along. You were never losing your destiny. You were becoming powerful enough to finally receive it. God says there is a powerful truth many chosen ones only understand after years of heartbreak. Your breakthrough did not begin when someone finally loved you correctly. It began the moment you stopped abandoning yourself trying to convince the wrong people to stay. That was the real turning point. Not the relationship ending. Not the betrayal. Not even the spiritual awakening itself. The true shift happened the day your soul finally became exhausted with surviving inside emotional confusion. Because before that moment, many of you were living in constant pursuit. Pursuing validation. Pursuing closure. Pursuing love from emotionally unavailable people. Pursuing relationships that demanded endless sacrifice while giving almost nothing in return. And somewhere along the way, you forgot something sacred. Love was never supposed to feel like begging. But wounded hearts often normalize suffering. When someone spends years feeling unseen, rejected, or emotionally neglected, they unconsciously start believing they must earn love through performance, through overgiving, through proving their worth repeatedly. That is why many chosen souls spent years trapped in exhausting karmic cycles. You kept trying harder, loving harder, forgiving harder, hoping harder, believing that if you sacrificed enough, eventually someone would finally choose you fully. But God says divine love cannot grow where self-abandonment exists. Because the moment you continuously betray your own spirit to preserve a connection, the relationship becomes rooted in fear rather than alignment. And fear can never sustain sacred union long-term. That is why your life had to change. Not just externally, internally. Your entire emotional foundation needed transformation. Some viewers listening right now may remember the exact season where everything inside them broke. Open emotionally. The moment you realized you could no longer keep living the same way. Maybe it happened after another betrayal, another disappointment, another sleepless night wondering why people kept hurting you despite your pure intentions. Or maybe it happened quietly, a slow exhaustion that built over time until one day your spirit simply whispered, "I cannot do this anymore." That whisper was holy, because it marked the death of your old identity. The version of you that accepted crumbs while calling it love. The version that tolerated disrespect to avoid loneliness. The version that believed healing others mattered more than protecting your own peace. That version is disappearing now. And although transformation can feel lonely at first, it creates space for an entirely different reality to emerge. God says your new life already started. Not when your twin flame arrives physically. Not when every prayer manifests visibly. But when your spirit finally chose alignment over emotional survival. That choice changed your energy. And once energy changes, destiny begins reorganizing itself around the new version of you. This is why your standards have shifted so dramatically recently. You no longer crave temporary attention. You crave emotional depth. You no longer chase intensity. You crave honesty. You no longer romanticize inconsistency. You crave peace. That transformation is evidence of spiritual maturity. Because healed souls stop confusing emotional chaos with passion. They stop mistaking anxiety for chemistry. And perhaps most importantly, they stop forcing connections that require constant suffering to survive. Some viewers may feel strange right now because their life no longer looks the way it used to. Your social circle changed. Your priorities changed. Your emotional needs changed. Even your relationship with solitude changed. What once felt unbearable now feels necessary. Because solitude stopped being punishment and became preparation. God says many chosen souls spend years fearing isolation without realizing that solitude is often where identity is reborn. It is where your intuition becomes stronger, where your spirit becomes clearer, where you finally hear your own truth without the noise of external validation controlling your decisions. And during this season, heaven has been teaching you one of the most important lessons of your life. You're not difficult to love. You were simply surrounded by people incapable of loving you correctly. That realization heals something deep inside the soul. Because many empathetic people blame themselves for the emotional immaturity of others. You wondered whether you were too much, too emotional, too intense, too sensitive. But God says your sensitivity was never the problem. Your spirit simply outgrew environments where emotional unavailability was considered normal. And now your soul refuses to shrink itself anymore, just to fit inside spaces that dishonor your peace. That refusal marks the beginning of freedom. Real freedom. The kind that allows you to walk away from connections that once controlled your emotions. Completely. The kind that helps you stop chasing people who only value you when access to your energy benefits them. The kind that teaches you how to choose yourself without guilt. Some viewers are currently experiencing an emotional rebirth without fully realizing it. You are becoming calmer, more detached from chaos, less reactive to manipulation, more aware of your intuition. And while part of you may still grieve the old chapters of your life, another part finally feels relief. Relief from no longer forcing what was never aligned. Relief from no longer carrying relationships entirely by yourself. Relief from no longer pretending emotional breadcrumbs were enough to satisfy your spirit. God says this relief is sacred, because peace is one of the clearest signs that your soul is returning to alignment. And aligned souls attract differently. They no longer attract exclusively through wounds. They attract through authenticity. That changes everything about your future relationships. The old version of you accepted confusion because confusion felt familiar. The healed version recognizes confusion as a warning sign instead of a romantic challenge. The old version stayed where love had to be constantly earned. The healed version understands that real connection flows through mutual emotional availability. The old version feared endings. The healed version understands that some endings are divine rescue missions. That wisdom did not come easily. You earned it through survival, through heartbreak, through loneliness, through learning how to rebuild yourself after people shattered your trust. And now God is turning those painful lessons into spiritual authority. Not authority over others, authority over yourself. Your emotions no longer control you the same way. Your fears no longer dominate your decisions completely. Your need for external validation is weakening. And slowly, your soul is becoming emotionally free. That freedom is preparing you for divine union. Because healthy love cannot fully enter the life of someone still addicted to chaos. Divine connection requires emotional responsibility, self-awareness, boundaries, truth. And those qualities are finally becoming rooted within you now. God says many chosen ones mistakenly believe their twin flame will save them emotionally. But heaven is saying something different. Your healing journey was teaching you how to save yourself first. Because when two emotionally awakened souls finally meet, the connection becomes partnership rather than dependency. That difference matters deeply. Dependency says, I need you so I can feel whole. Alignment says, I discovered wholeness within myself, and now we build together. That is the kind of love approaching your life now. Not childish fantasy, not emotional addiction, but something spiritually grounded, mutual, peaceful, transformative. And perhaps that is why everything fake had to leave first. The distractions, the karmic cycles, the relationships that survived only through confusion and inconsistency. They could not follow you into this next chapter because your spirit evolved beyond them. Some viewers may still feel moments of sadness for the time they lost. The years spent chasing unavailable people. The energy wasted trying to earn love that should have flowed naturally. But God says nothing was truly wasted. Every painful experience sharpened your discernment. Every disappointment strengthened your intuition. Every betrayal taught your soul what alignment does not feel like. Without those lessons, you may never have recognized divine love when it finally appeared. And now something beautiful is happening spiritually. You are no longer searching for your worth through another person's approval. You are remembering who you were before rejection convinced you otherwise. That remembrance changes your entire reality. Because once the soul reconnects with its value, it stops settling for relationships that require self-betrayal. And that is exactly why your destiny is drawing closer now. Not because you became perfect, but because you finally became honest with yourself. Honest about your wounds. Honest about your patterns. Honest about the relationships that drained you. Honest about the version of yourself that no longer deserves to suffer just to feel loved. That honesty opened the door for transformation. And transformation opened the door for alignment. God says your future no longer belongs to the cycles that once broke your heart. Those seasons are ending. The chasing is ending. The confusion is ending. The emotional exhaustion is ending. And now, after everything you survived, your soul is finally stepping into the life that was waiting for you the moment you stopped running from your own worth. Because your new chapter did not begin when someone finally chose you. It began when you finally chose yourself and trusted God enough to release everything that could no longer walk beside you into your destiny. God is saying this final message directly to the deepest part of your spirit. You survived everything that was supposed to stop you. Read that again carefully. You survived the betrayals that almost destroyed your ability to trust. You survived the loneliness that made you question your worth. You survived the confusion, the spiritual warfare, the emotional exhaustion, the karmic cycles, and the painful delays that once made you feel forgotten by heaven. And despite all of it, your soul is still standing, still awakening, still moving toward the destiny God wrote for your life long before fear ever entered the story. That is not weakness. That is proof of divine protection. Because there were seasons where you should have completely lost yourself. Seasons where the pressure became unbearable. Seasons where people projected so much negativity, rejection, and emotional pain onto your spirit that part of you almost gave up on love entirely. But heaven never released its grip on your future. Even during the darkest moments. Even when you felt abandoned. Even when you believed the delay meant your prayers were being ignored. God says what you called delay was often protection happening invisibly. Protection from entering sacred union while still emotionally vulnerable to manipulation. Protection from repeating karmic cycles that would have drained your spirit again. Protection from people who looked appealing externally, but secretly carried energy that would have disrupted your purpose. And now, after everything you survived, you are finally beginning to understand why certain doors never opened. Why certain relationships ended. Why certain people disappeared. Why your spirit kept feeling restless whenever you tried settling for less than alignment. Because your soul was never designed for counterfeit love. You were created for something deeper. Something spiritually real. And although the journey took longer than you expected, heaven says the timing was never accidental. Every lesson arrived precisely when your spirit needed it most. The heartbreaks taught discernment. The loneliness taught self-discovery. The betrayals taught boundaries. The delays taught faith. And now the person emerging from all those painful seasons is no longer the same soul that first began this journey. You are wiser now. Stronger now. More spiritually aware. More emotionally grounded. More honest about what your heart truly deserves. That transformation is the miracle. Because many people spend their entire lives trapped inside cycles they never questioned. But you awakened. And awakening changes everything. Some viewers listening right now may still feel moments of fear about the future. Fear that love will disappoint you again. Fear that destiny will somehow slip away permanently. Fear that maybe you are too damaged after everything you experienced. But God says this clearly. Your wounds do not disqualify you from divine love. In fact, many of your scars became the very reason your soul developed the wisdom necessary to sustain it. Because healed people love differently than wounded people. Wounded people chase validation. Healed people recognize alignment. Wounded people tolerate confusion. Healed people choose peace. Wounded people fear abandonment so deeply that they settle for emotional inconsistency. Healed people understand that real love does not require self-betrayal to survive. And now your spirit is finally stepping into that healed awareness. Not perfectly. Healing is never perfectly linear. There may still be moments where old fears return. Moments where loneliness whispers that you should settle. Moments where your past wounds try convincing you that emotionally unavailable people are all you deserve. But you are no longer asleep spiritually. And awakened souls cannot comfortably remain inside illusions for long. That is why your standards changed. That is why your intuition became louder. That is why certain relationships suddenly felt unbearable even when part of you still loved the people involved. Your soul was evolving beyond the cycles that once controlled it. God says many chosen ones are currently entering the final emotional separation from their old identity. The old self chased. The new self aligns. The old self begged. The new self discerns. The old self feared being alone. The new self understands solitude can become sacred preparation for divine connection. And perhaps the greatest transformation of all. The old self searched desperately for love externally. The new self finally understands that self-worth must exist internally first. That lesson changes destiny completely. Because once you stop seeking validation through emotionally unavailable people, your energy becomes spiritually magnetic. Not through force, not through manipulation, but through authenticity. Healed energy naturally attracts what resonates with truth. And truth is what your soul has been learning through every painful chapter of this journey. God says your twin flame connection was never meant to awaken obsession. It was meant to awaken remembrance. The remembrance that your soul has always carried divine value. The remembrance that you do not need to shrink yourself to receive love. The remembrance that healthy connection should feel like expansion instead of emotional survival. And yes, there may still be challenges ahead. Sacred unions still require communication, growth, accountability, and emotional maturity. But the difference now is that your spirit no longer seeks love from desperation. You seek it from alignment. That difference will protect your future relationship in ways your old self could not yet understand. Because desperation ignores red flags. Alignment recognizes them immediately. Desperation fears endings. Alignment trusts divine timing. Desperation accepts crumbs. Alignment waits for reciprocity. And after everything you survived, your soul finally understands the difference. That is why nothing that tried to delay your destiny truly succeeded. Not the karmic relationships. Not the manipulation. Not the jealousy. Not the spiritual attacks. Not the abandonment wounds. Not even your own temporary moments of doubt. Because what God chooses cannot be permanently destroyed by temporary darkness. It can be tested, refined, delayed, strengthened through pain, but never erased. And one day soon, you will look back on this entire journey differently. You will understand why the heartbreaks happened, why certain people disappeared, why your life felt so lonely during seasons of awakening, why heaven kept removing what your wounded heart still tried holding on to. Because eventually you will realize, God was not taking love away from you. He was teaching you how to recognize the real thing. That realization will free you forever. No more chasing. No more begging. No more confusing inconsistency with passion. No more abandoning your spirit just to keep temporary people comfortable. Those cycles are ending now. A new chapter is opening. One built on truth, peace, mutual growth, spiritual alignment. And perhaps for the first time in your life, your soul is beginning to trust love again, not because another person finally changed, but because you finally changed. You finally stopped seeing yourself through the eyes of people who failed to value you correctly. You finally stopped measuring your worth through rejection. You finally stopped asking emotionally unavailable people to confirm what God already wrote into your spirit from the beginning. You were always worthy, always chosen, always protected, even during the delay. And now heaven is saying this final truth clearly. The people who tried to block your destiny only became part of the story that awakened you. They were never powerful enough to cancel what God already ordained. Your twin flame destiny still exists. Your breakthrough still exists. Your divine alignment still exists. And after everything you survived, you are finally becoming emotionally ready to receive it without losing yourself in the process. So before this message ends, take one deep breath and hear these words as if heaven itself is speaking directly to your soul. What is meant for you is already moving toward you. Not through force, not through desperation, but through divine timing. And no person, no betrayal, no delay, and no darkness can permanently stop what God has already chosen for your life. If you are ready to fully release the old cycle and step into divine alignment, comment, "I accept my divine destiny." And if this message touched your soul, remember to like, subscribe, and share this video with another chosen one who needs this reminder today. Because your story is not ending in heartbreak. It is finally beginning in alignment.